To go back to the time before the Great Fall, when King Atlan ruled over all that was, when the kingdoms of Atlantis were one. It was a time of great prosperity and technological advancement. We had unlocked the secret of unlimited energy at a time when the rest of the world still thought the Earth was flat. But we became too ambitious, too hungry for power. The ocean swallowed us, and Atlantis sank. But the very power that collapsed our civilization also paved the way to our future. It gave us the ability to breathe underwater. And so, we evolved. Others regressed, became savage. And the king lived out the remainder of his days in self-imposed exile. Neither he nor the Trident were ever seen again.
No secret is revealed. No secret is revealed. No secret is revealed. No secret is revealed. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. No secret is revealed. We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has constricted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. No secret is revealed. No secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. No secret is revealed.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision. A world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. A new world order. A world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision. A world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. A new world order. A world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision. A world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. A new world order. A world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision. A world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. When we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. A new world order. A world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision, a world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be, a new world order, a world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision, a world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be. A new world order, a world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision, a world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be, a new world order, a world where the rule of law, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision, a world where the rule of law, when we are successful, and we will be, and we will be.
But let's just say we came from apes. Let's not even say that. Let's say we just came from Neanderthal. Well, okay, we go forward and we live in caves. And then we build bigger and bigger, and technology gets better and better, and we're in skyscrapers. I mean, that's the narrative that we have. But we don't see that. We absolutely don't see that. And again, it's not questioned. We see completely the reverse. The further back you go, the greater the architecture. Not only the beauty, but the building style and the megalithic size of the block work and the precision of cutting of the rocks that we cannot replicate today. And so this doesn't fit the narrative. We're primitive now, and we've lost so much. We've lost the ability to build these grand pieces of architecture. Our art, for example, hasn't progressed. Our music hasn't progressed. I don't know if anything has progressed. It appears that we have gone backwards. It appears that the further back you go, the greater. And even beyond building, the people before the people that built things didn't need to build things. I believe they either grew them or they just had the ability to carve into rock with a laser like precision and scoop rock out with ease. Who would need to build if you could do that? You would just pick a nice hard rocky mountain and build inward. Carve whatever you need, and there'd be no need to build. And that's what we see. We see, and these builders, which I think are the greatest, we give the least credit to, and we attribute as the most primitive, which I think is tragic. And we remain in this ignorant state. We've been taught to be ignorant. The mining building, the mining building, the agricultural building. Are you kidding me? The manufacturing building from the casino. Was this not a grand building from an older time? I mean, we're not just talking about laying out buildings here. We're talking about laying out these waterfronts with you know, these glorious statues in the middle of them. I mean, this is not, you know, something that you do in a year. This is building a city. I mean, you're going to tell me this is the transportation building. I mean, just, you know, every day I think I've seen the most ridiculous thing only to have it replaced by the next most ridiculous thing I've ever experienced. The transportation building. This is a crime against humanity to tear a building like this down. I don't care what the story is behind it. And this certainly wasn't built for the World's Fair. This is absolutely amazing. And torn down to hide our past. The Machinery Hall from the Colonnade. Machinery Hall is absolutely glorious. I can't even believe it. I really can't. We've gone backwards. Again, the agricultural building. How could you even conceive of calling this an agricultural building when this is like the Grand Palace? You know, this is just mind-blowing, and I'm pretty much speechless. I really am. Now, you can tell that Antiquitech has been removed from here. You really can, knowing nothing about this. The woman's building. This is just something else. This is just the most amazing thing that could have been in America. But some has survived. Absolutely amazing. To think that they had the nerve to tell us that this was built for the World's Fair, as they wiped out our history in front of our very eyes. Well, not in front of ours, in front of the people in the late 1800s. Yeah, this would have changed everything. If we would have grown up with these preserved buildings around us, we would have viewed the entire world differently. And we would have not thought about Greece and Rome and Turkey as these separate places from us here in North America. No, the whole world would have a unified feel once people realized that there was a one world people building the same style everywhere. We have a similar situation here in San Francisco. And a very, very, very similar story. And I'm not going to go into it, but it is absolutely similar, that all of these were built to be temporary and they were torn down. And yet there are some that remain, and we have some glorious pictures of them, as this one shows right here. And this one is the Palace of Fine Arts once again. You know, the same designations given to these other buildings at the World's Fair in Chicago. In some cases, as we can see here, this one was actually preserved. And how fortunate, how blessed we are, you know, because this is the kind of picture that we see, and yet, you know, oftentimes we don't actually get to see the real thing. And in this case, you can actually see it still to this day. Absolutely amazing. This throws the whole narrative of them building these structures as temporary structures right out of the water. I mean, this is absolutely the real deal. Look at the size of the people compared to these columns. I mean, absolutely amazing. And this is, you know, exactly what we would find as ruins anywhere in the world. And here they are in San Francisco. And this one is called the Palace of Fine Arts Rotunda. And so, yeah, 1915, oftentimes, you know, we don't get to see the modern version because it's been torn down. So here we have the Netherlands Pavilion, 1915. What they've done is they've left this structure on the left, but they've torn down this glory, you know, the most glorious part. So yeah, let's have a look now at what they've replaced this with. Here it is. Here it is. This is what we get today, you know. So this junky building, and for what? You know, and for what? So the Palace of Horticulture. I mean, look at this one with the The little pieces on top, the detail is astounding. Absolutely amazing. And yeah, so here it is. Here's what they replaced it with. This is it. This was, you know, and they've done a pretty good job of actually positioning themselves, you know, exactly where these things were. So here's, it was, you know, this was more important than this. You know, of course this had to be torn down. And again, a palace of transportation. Look at this beauty replaced by this. We're told that San Francisco is built in 1850. In 1850 you have 1,000 people, in 1848 1,000 people, and buildings like this suddenly arrive. And again, I'm going to show you pictures of the entire skyline filled with buildings like this, filled, an entire city, and they're going to tell us that 25,000 people were there, and that these buildings were built and torn down and replaced by things like this and things like this. Yeah, same street. And in fact, you know, where there was the sidewalk there, you know, they've still utilized this survey. So the amusement zone. So, you know, I think that's what they did. They just took these glorious structures and, you know, have these fairs, and, you know, this idea of, you know, even what we call a fair is really just a ruse, just something to turn the eye. So here's what we had again, just basically a part of the city. This was probably a, you know, a commercial area in this ancient city, and now we have a park. That's it. The park was more important than, you know, than the original buildings of the city, apparently. You know, no, it all had to go. It all had to go for this park. And the Machinery Palace, again, like we saw in Chicago, the same designations. Look at this amazing marvel. These columns and statues and the Antiquitech. Amazing. And here's what they have replaced it with. This was, again, very important. You know, this is, you know, a city that's starting out, you know, that could use beautiful infrastructure. Who knows? Let's just assume they built it. However, no, now it's not worth it to them. And we need to go backwards and build smaller. Now, these are temporary buildings. You know, that's the irony, is when they show us pictures like this and say that these were temporary and built for the World's Fair. How ironic when these, what we build now, is temporary, not this old glory of the past. And again, you know, and the trees also were, you know, fully grown and brought in temporarily as well for the event. The nations of the East, court of sun and stars, you know, this beautiful, beautiful arc of triumph with this amazing Antiquitech around it, which I've never seen. By the time we've seen any of these arches, they, you know, all such things have been removed. But this is one of the most glorious things ever. And here you go. Here's what they replaced it with. I think this is probably an original little sliver left of the facade here, because this does look like the old style, and I think this has been preserved. Just this little facade here seems like the style we're seeing of this old world and of this old people, but far from this, you know, far from this. You know, we're probably just seeing a little piece, you know, just a little piece that they left. And here is the service building, and you see how they've painted some signage up here. In any case, a glorious building, and replaced by this. Still with hints of the leftover world, and of course there would have been skilled architects left over from the old world that would spill over into this period, but no comparison here, you know, no comparison, you know, just the faintest husk of the old building style, but definitely temporary. Now here is the Liberal Arts Palace and Tower, and this is one of the most glorious ones. And this actually reminds me of some towers that I was looking at recently in Morocco. Beautiful Moroccan style. And now, if you go and look at, some of these images in Morocco, you'll see this, but I think that the tops have been removed, as always. And so all we get is the towers left. But really, really similar style. Real intricate and same people, I believe. And yes, here we go. Replaced by this. Replaced by this. By this junk. This to this. No good reason could be given, and no good reason has been given for doing such things. Notice the Antiquitech antennas even at the gates here, all with the little starry things. And later, basically we would turn every piece of Antiquitech into a flagpole, if we didn't just remove it completely. And to this day, look at where your flagpoles are, especially on your older buildings. So the State of Washington Pavilion, look at this beauty. And they replaced this with nothing. But yeah, this was really important to get rid of, to make room for nothing. This glorious, glorious structure. Somebody really went to great lengths to, bury a lot of these old photos. Here we go. Again, like I was showing you earlier, but now this, what we are being told, was built for temporary usage at the World's Fair in 1915. And again, San Francisco in 1848 had 1,000 people. And now look at the weathering. Look at the aging of this and the intricacy. So we're to believe that, in 50 years, they create this amazing, and once again, not just buildings, but a city. The splendor of these buildings, and really no difference to what we saw in Chicago, and what we see in Paris, and in Greece, and in Portugal, and in Russia, and in South America. In every part of the world we see these. But I don't know if anybody has such a ridiculous story as we do in America for ours. Look at this. And a double arch. An arch and then another arch. I mean, look at the size of the people and the doorways. I mean, we cannot recreate these arches now. And we don't. And we didn't. And here we just have ruins in the brush, in the overgrown brush, showing, the age of this era and these people. Just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing in every way. Just a city full of Antiquitech and marvel. Just absolute marvel. And when you look at what we replaced all of this with, it's just a shattering proof to our false historical narrative. Look at this column. I mean, this is what we see in St. Petersburg. The size of it. And again, they tore this down. And nowadays when we make concrete columns, we see these same types of, spiraling lines because you use like a cast. But we fill it with junky concrete. And this type of geopolymer is, some kind of a marble granite. Absolutely amazing. And again, to tear things like this down, really just to hide our past and all these inheritors of this civilization. This is the gold rush. This is the true gold rush. Imagine the amounts of gold and luxuries just laying around for the plucking. Just inheriting a city. I mean, so much luxury that you can afford to just tear most of it down. And now people don't remember. Now all of a sudden they don't even remember. And now by the time 1915 comes along, you have a depression and a World War I, and people's minds are in the mud, literally, with all this chaos. And now history is conveniently rewritten. And yet it's all here. It's all here for us to see. And thank God that these photos are actually preserved and we can see what our past looked like.
Today, I just want to point out some older buildings and how the ground level is just really out of whack with them. And it's my belief that there was actually a cataclysm, maybe even a series of cataclysms in the 1600s that, as one of the side effects, it deposited just layers and layers of mud, dirt, earth, and it engulfed these buildings. And then we've been digging them out or destroying them altogether. So I just wanted to point out, this is the old Boston State House. And as you can see, there's probably a whole nother floor here, but it's underneath the ground. And you can see here these windows getting tinier and tinier, and you have an entrance going into the second floor. And this is pretty common with these buildings that we're going to be looking at. This building, it was built prior to whatever event happened. Halifax Academy, we're told it was built in 1877. And again, you know, you have what appears to be one floor, two floor. I'm going to guess there's at least a third floor here. And again, you have stairway going to the second floor. I'm just jumping around. Colorado, again, third floor, buried. Windows buried. There's no third floor. There's a door that is literally on the second floor. This is a good example because this is in Australia. It's a old Masonic hotel, 1900. Here you can see that these windows just you wouldn't build it like this. You don't, you know, trailing windows off into the ground. And you can see there are probably windows here too. Richmond, Virginia, 1906. And here you can see, you know, windows getting smaller, being covered up. San Francisco, you know, look at these windows here. Door, they had to just kind of extend this window, turn it into a door. Fifth Avenue, New York City mansions. You've got this similar architecture, and you can see the first floors here are they're buried, but they actually have paved streets here. And you know, there's just, look at this architecture. You have the stairways going up to this second floor here. This floor is underneath the street level, and you can see these antennas all over there. They're faded out, but again, you have another Vanderbilt's. Okay, you have another mansion, and again, the stairs going up to this level, and there's a whole level that's buried. I mean, just look at this architecture. It's unbelievable. Once you start seeing all these towers, it's just, you see them pop up everywhere. Photos from 1891. Perfect example here. Stairs going up to this level, and you have this whole level buried. And again, stairs going up to this level. This entire level is buried. Cornelius Vanderbilt. Look at this. The windows buried in the ground. Stairs going up. We're told he built this. He did not build this. There's a fireplace with this metallic plate, and they took away the two devices. Oh, this is good. Because Vanderbilt wanted his home to be finished quickly as possible, he gave the builder 18 months to complete it. 600 workmen working around the clock. Thousands of people watched the construction for a year and a half, and there's no construction photos of this. Thousands of people, a multi-millionaire. Oh, and by the way, this mansion too, this mansion that was torn down after 16 years, and it cost $200 million. There's no photos of this being constructed. The Carnegie Mansion, the first one we looked at, no photos of it being constructed. The Vanderbilt one, this Vanderbilt one, no photos of it being constructed. Mud flood. The previous two, mud flood. And the this one gets demolished here. 1926, this one gets demolished. By the way, this is Cornelius Vanderbilt II. Hopefully you guys recognize that hand gesture, the hidden hand. But he's supposedly the guy who built this. So I think these elites, I don't think like they just randomly became, the head of copper magnet, banking magnet, whatever else, railroad magnate, oil magnate. I think they're placed in those positions, and it has something to do. You probably had to belong to some kind of bloodline or fraternity to be appointed. I believe it's all appointed. So just let's take a look at a few more. Another mansion on Millionaire Avenue, Fifth Avenue, or Millionaire Row, Fifth Avenue. You got, of course, here we go, in the ground, stairs going up, mud flutter. George Eret Mansion. You can tell windows here, stairs going up to this level. This guy was a member of several leading German societies. I don't know, I just highlighted that. Again, this mansion, I looked, there's no construction photos. And this one, there's no construction photos. And here we go with this one. And again, they all have these rooms where they just collect all this art. And I think there's a purpose behind that. And it's not just because they like to collect art. Lost Jacob Rupert Mansion. Stairs going up. And you got your little windows below ground. I mean, it was just all these places. They needed an excuse to account for all these mansions. And the Gilded Age is a perfect cover, because America was definitely becoming industrialized, and you had factories and all these kinds of things. So it was happening, but tucked into it, there's this whole lie about these mansions and the elite. Here you can see it's a mud flutter. It's torn down in 1925. 1925. So a lot of these are torn down between 1920 and 1930. The Lost Mary Mason Jones Mansion. Here you go. See, there's this whole, there's windows, stairs going up to this level. These are all windows going down. And portholes. All these portholes. You guys get the picture. And it got replaced by this. It's not just in New York where these mansions are. They're all over the place. St. Paul, Minnesota, there's this James J. Hill House, and it's completed in 1891. So right in that Gilded Age era. Inside this house, you got one of these crazy organs. In Chicago, they had their own version of Millionaire's Row, Fifth Avenue. They had something called Prairie Avenue. And one of the mansions in Prairie Avenue was Marshall Field Mansion. This is the same Marshall Fields that has the department store in the United States. You got all the windows here. This is ground level, and you got stairs going up to this level here. The home was torn down in 1955, and of course the mansion was the first Chicago home to have electric lighting, and the public were barred from the structure. That's nice. So it's in Chicago too. It's all over. It's not just New York. New York is a pocket of a lot of these structures, but they exist in all the big cities, and even Detroit. Both of these are destroyed in between 1900 and 1910. And the Boeing House here, this is the same The Boeing Aerospace guy, I think it's like the second biggest defense contractor in the world. He was born in this place, and they still tore it down. This whole Gilded Era or Gilded Age is a cover story. As far as the elite, this newly minted group of millionaires going crazy and building mansions everywhere, and like making them look like European style mansions, and that is just a total lie and cover story to account for why they have all these mansions. That's all it is. It's a great story, and I think Mark Twain, I don't think it's an accident that Mark Twain has a book about it, you know? Yeah, Mark Twain's novel. I have a feeling he's one of these culture creation guys. So
The only earthly certainty is oblivion.
Welcome to the mysterious stranger.
Hello,
Who are you?
an angel.
What's your name?
Satan. Uh-oh. What's the matter?
Nothing. Only it's sure a sorry name for an angel.
Please, come in.
Did you see that? Mars.
How do you learn to do that?
I didn't learn it at all. It comes naturally to me, like other curious things.
Oh boy.
Can we help?
You may make some people.
I'll make the king and queen.
I'm gonna make a soldier.
Look at that little village.
There. Here's a buddy.
Now we'll give them life.
Moving.
Looks like my pap on Saturday night.
Wow,
Look, they're moving.
there's like regular people.
I find you humans quite interesting, even though you are a worthless, greedy lot. How annoying that sound is. Fools. What fascinations there are on this planet. Strange mortals with curious customs. We'll have a storm now, and an earthquake if you like. You must stand aside, out of danger. I can do no wrong, for I do not know what it is.
You murdered him.
Never mind them. People are of no value. We could make more sometime, if we need them. Life itself a dream. Nothing exists save empty space, and you are but a thought.
Civil War Monument, dedicated July 4th, 1894. And yet the picture is in 1907. And so, yeah, does this really seem like, 10-year-old monument? You know, maybe some of the things at the base could possibly be, like these top portions here. But not this. No. That's not 10 years old. That weathering. And I don't think that this, Sultan character is even the type of thing that, they would have placed here to dedicate. But really interesting. And everything you see in the background here, again, is going to be much older than we're told. Really amazing. I mean, again, we recognize that style. That's not our style. That's the Greco-Roman style. And why would our people just come over and begin building in this style? So now this is a pretty modern picture. Let's see, this is from 1943, but regardless, this is much older. And this, I believe, is in Chicago. And I believe it's one of the newspaper agencies that own this building, even to date, if I'm not mistaken. But you know, when you're down on the street level, it might just look like an ordinary building. And it's not until you get to the very top here that you realize it's much older. This is something we would see in Europe, or, again, this is not, for Americans to just, thinking of our narrative. No way does this just arrive on the scene. Do we just start building this way? And we don't build like this now. And we didn't then. I mean, this is the peak of an older civilization, not our own. So this is a ruin in America. This is a Greco-Roman style ruin in America. And I think the Civil War may have been to purge a lot of this architecture and essentially historical reference. Because to me, what were they lobbing cannons at the tops of the buildings and blowing the tops of these structures? To me, this seems like a war against the architecture. Our country's formed in 1776, and we're told in 50 years this would have all been built out, only to be destroyed. Really, really amazing. And beautiful. See, look how they've torn this one down here, this Antiquitech. And this is what it looked like. And you can see this is already old. This is already... And the city is as well. Now let's go 1865, South Carolina, Charleston. Again, the same thing. What was going on in the Civil War? No. I mean, again, this is so much older. And I don't think any kind of war could do this kind of damage. I mean, this damage came from the top. 1908 Cathedral in Massachusetts, St. Paul's Church. Now this looks like it has been mud flooded. Again, there's a whole story here that we see exposed that is completely buried on this side, completely underground. And just really beautiful. This reminds me of a church, a cathedral I'd seen in Europe. Same kind of blockwork, same masterful building. In Mexico, but I just thought it was absolutely amazing as well. Mexico, And it just seems so old. What an amazing style. Absolutely amazing. Past civilization. Guatemala, 1915. This amazing, amazing intricacy is actually breaking off. You see how it's broken off here? So, you know, this gives us an idea of how they were actually constructing these. And look how many layers we can see here. We have a brick column core, then a surfacing, some kind of a wrapping, and then another surfacing, which you can see up here. And up here at the top, where it was higher away from the water and this flooding, it's much more preserved. This is probably the final product. An older people, and here is the newer people with a basket on her head, which I think is really impressive, but not her people, but living amongst it and probably occupying it. So let's move on. Now here, you know, I was really amazed with this building. So impressed. Just so impressed. And I almost wondered if, you know, you'd build a building like this with this glory and later put a cemetery right next to it. So I almost felt like this cemetery was an afterthought, and I have a later picture that may depict that, you know. I mean, I don't think so. I think this is going to be like a beautiful park that you're going to have, you know, next to a gorgeous building like this. But no, in the afterthought, this becomes a cemetery. And even the building next to it is just gorgeous. I mean, the ornamentation here. Look at this. I mean, absolutely amazing. The peak, the absolute peak of the Greco-Roman style right here. Just amazing. I just wanted to emphasize that, you know, that this is the end of a civilization. This is absolute glory. This is not the beginning. You know, and any date that we're given on these photos, you can easily, you know, subtract 100 years. Just look at the wear of the buildings and, you know, easily 100 years, probably more. Probably more. I mean, look at the wearing of these columns up here. This, you know, these haven't been cleaned in a while. This is aged. This is probably 200 years old, and this easily blows our narrative out of the water. That this, you know, that our country starts in 1776. Lower Manhattan in 1903. Just remarkable, remarkable architecture. Look at this. I mean, they don't leave anything out, this last civilization. The ornamentation, nothing is ordinary. No street lamps. This has to be some kind of wireless. Come on. Amazing. Again, the ornamentation. Look at this. Look at the ornamentation, you know, way beyond these people. These people don't need ornamentation like this. That doesn't make sense either. In these streets, I mean, you're going to build like this and you're going to leave the streets muddy? No, they haven't quite recovered yet, you know. There's still rubble, but yet many people have been introduced at this point in 1903. So here we have Charleston, South Carolina. This doesn't seem like Civil War, and this doesn't seem like Civil War people built this. It seems like it doesn't fit our narrative whatsoever. This shouldn't be in America. And yet now it's already a ruin. already ruined and soon to be destroyed. We're lucky to even see these pictures. Now here we have Boston, Massachusetts. 1907. I'd say this building is at least 100 or 200 years old. So again, that doesn't make sense. You know, nobody built this in the 1700s in America. Obviously they did, but not our people. It doesn't fit our narrative. There's just 3 people hanging out here. Inheritors. I'm always fascinated with the silly designations of these buildings. And so this one, you know, like this is a bank. Like this would be the best way to build a bank. It's absolutely beautiful and had another purpose. The Alamo, which I touched on a prior video, this little Spaniard top flare has been added later, and we can see in a lot of the older lithographs what this looked like. And this was a Greek-Roman style building that has been turned into a Spaniard look to hide its true history. Now in France, and again, I don't believe it was just a cathedral. Look at this amazing Greek-Roman Parthenon-style building in Germany. Beautiful. Vienna, Austria. We don't build like this anymore, and this is just an amazing building. To me, it's like a greenhouse. It's just super futuristic, and we don't see it anymore, and most of them had been torn down. How many stamps did you sell to build yourself a post office like this? Absolutely ridiculous. I think we all knew. We really all did know. But I think we needed permission in some way to believe it. We're still delivering mail on horses, and we have to be perfectly logical here. It's 1905, and how old could this building be? How young could this building be? You know, at the youngest, this building is 100 years old. No, this is not a post office. Again, in Boston, in 1885. 1885. This is your United States Post Office. The most uncharismatic building you could go into today in present times. And really, it doesn't need to be any more than what it is in present times. You know, maybe a dozen offices, maybe a little warehouse in the back. What was this? You know, a hotel? Probably a hotel. And here you can see construction. What do the new people do? The new people build with wood. That was as good as it got. Wood and simple stonework, but not this. Not this. Now here is the Woolworth building. And at one point this was actually the biggest building in America. Look at this thing. An American skyscraper castle. Look at this thing. From the base, you know, maybe walking around on the sidewalk, you might just think this is normal, although I don't think so. You could not appreciate the glory of this building, just like the Tribune building in Chicago, until you look at it at the top. Absolutely amazing. And what was Woolworth's? A department store? Are you kidding me? You're gonna build a building like this? No way. Absolutely amazing. And just look at all this back here too. Everything with the Antiquitech antennas. And the Singer building. In New York City, 1909. How old do you think this building is? You think this building was built a couple years before this photo? I don't think so. Look at the intricacy up here. How, in this time period, are you going to build like this? They're built and oftentimes demolished 20 or 30 years later. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. Philadelphia City Hall. Again, a ridiculous designation. We didn't realize that America was as beautiful as Europe. You know, here Americans travel to Europe to see glorious architecture without realizing that every major city in America has glorious European Greco-Roman architecture in our backyard. Look at this. And they're going to tell us that this is the City Hall? Are you kidding me? I mean, let's be logical again. A government, municipality, City Hall. If somebody would even propose to build something like this, they would probably be fired. Even today. And there's not the resources for it. You're going to believe this is a city hall? And it was always, you know, if the building was just extra glorious, they would call it a city hall. Now, they couldn't call this a post office. It's just too beautiful to call a post office. So this has to be a city hall. Show this picture to somebody and say, where do you think you are? I'm not going to say Philly. Park Row Building in New York City. Just look at this neighborhood. Columns on it. Look at this style of building. Imperial. Absolutely imperial. The peak of greatness. And then here come our reset people. First in horses, then little buggies. The Equitable Life Building of New York City. Oh, of course. Insurance company. Looks identical to the few post offices we were looking at earlier. 1891, Wisconsin. Absolutely amazing. And, you know, when I finally woke up to these kind of things, I found myself in Salt Lake City, seeing the same architecture. The same weathered, old architecture. As if I'd suddenly woke up out of some dream. This is absolutely amazing. Not Greece or Rome. 1906, Kentucky. Again, you know, is that what you think of? Glorious. The exact same style that we see all over the world. Look at this Antiquitech. And these portals with these Greek columns and our little signature triangles. This is amazing. In Kentucky. 1906. Post office. Absolutely amazing. A complete joke. Michigan. One of my favorite styles. And when you look at these columns, in whatever city you are, they're the same style as you would see in Russia, in St. Petersburg. That same kind of rosy granite cast column. And these ones are kind of short right here. They've gone with the short column. Atlantic City, New Jersey, the Marlborough, and my birth city, actually. Really, really beautiful. Really futuristic and old world. I mean, this touches on the architecture of the world. I mean, we have so many different styles incorporated in this building that I think, you know, just looking at it seems to shatter the narrative, and I could see why they leveled it. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. The Erie County Savings Building in Buffalo. Around the Lake Erie, a lot of civilization going on in the older maps, and this is definitely one of these old buildings. Not a bank. The Imperial Institute in London. Just amazing. And you know, again, I feel like I'm not shocked to see buildings like this in Europe, or have not been throughout my life. It is more shocking to see them in America, where the narrative doesn't really add up. And now, we are seeing these very buildings, but we're seeing buildings like this in America now built on a skyscraper, where you really can't even appreciate the tops. But we have them. We have them too. They're just sitting on what looks like, a conservative skyscraper, and then you have a top like this. San Francisco, the Call Building in 1898. Again, this is a European Greco-Roman, super futuristic, peak of advancement style. And we can't build like this anymore, and we don't. New York World Building, I've never seen this beaut. 1890. Again, this building has to be 100 years old by looking at it. Even at the very least 50, and that would be stupid to say it was 50. This is definitely an old building. Columns all throughout, just fascinating. Penn Station, again, straight out of Greece. And the Chicago Waterworks building, just silly. Silly to build a waterworks tower this way. Very castle-like, absolutely a castle. And this one was just absolutely amazing. I'm glad we got to this. The Iowa City General Hospital. Really. Probably one of the most ridiculous. Just blown away. A little cathedral on top of this hospital. Really fascinating. And really ridiculous. And finally, I'll just wrap it up with my little Saltaire here in my backyard. A power-generating power plant, I believe. Salt water is conductive for electricity, and just really beautiful, 20 miles out of the major city in the middle of nowhere. But really, I just feel blessed to be able to see this photo. Such pristine architecture, with attention to fine detail. Only to slap some signs up on the wall like this. This is tacky, and I don't think these buildings were designed this way. Windows behind here. This was a home, some kind of grand residence. Now it's been turned into several commercial sites. Cigars down here. All of this. And now it's been turned into commercial district. And again, this same style. I'm sure in your city you have seen this style. Maybe it was a municipality building or a church or whatever we call it now. The Marlborough in New Jersey, and they tore this building down. They tore it down even though it's one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen in America. And they tore it down. But getting back to my point, when we look at a scene like this, and we look at a building like I just showed, and the people who don't really seem to be very accustomed to going to the beach. Tents, not really bathing suits, not really beach clothing. Post-reset, it appears as if everybody's been given, very similar clothing.
Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. Recently, you have probably heard me talking quite a bit about history, quite a bit about the lost nation of Tartaria, a nation that existed in Europe that nobody seems to know about. It's a nation that's been expunged from history, and yet it still exists on many maps. Well, it still exists on many old maps anyway. It doesn't exist on too many new maps, but you can still find it on old maps if you search for it, and it does appear to be quite a well-known and well-established nation. Of course, any academic sources that you question about this nation, they will simply tell you it was an area of land, it was never actually a nation, and yet, as I've also pointed out previously, we can find flags of this nation. And if it was just an area and not a nation, then it wouldn't have a flag. So it was in fact a nation and not simply an area of land, and there's every indication that it had also spread out to become a worldwide civilization. This is very much suggested by the similar architecture in so many countries around the world, very old architecture, which is all very much the same. And this is what is termed Greco-Roman architecture. But one would ask, why would every country around the world be building their government buildings using the same architecture? You find this everywhere. You find it all through the Americas, you find it through South America, you find it even in Japan and Australia. So why would they be using the same style? That's the question. And even not just the architecture, but the symbolism, the motifs, the designs, even the clothing, the styles of clothing that people wear, these are all very similar all around the world. They may not seem that way when you first look at them on the surface, but when you really analyze things, you find that they all have a common root, which very much suggests that all of these nations, all of these cultures were all connected. And no matter how you look at it, this is very much what is indicated, ladies and gentlemen, and also through the discovery of a worldwide language, which was Magyar, or the root language of Hungarian, which was spoken by the Incas, by the Polynesians, and also by all the Australian Aboriginals, and many cultures all around the world seem to have spoken this language. Polynesians, Melanesians, all of the island cultures seem to have spoken it. And something else you've heard me talking about a great deal is the evidence suggesting a worldwide mud flood that happened as recently as 150 to 200 years ago. As I've mentioned before, there's a Russian channel run by a man called Philip Druzinin who is covering this quite extensively, and I do recommend you go and look at the research that he's done on this, because it is quite compelling. And you'll find that there is evidence of this mud flood that exists everywhere. I mean, it did happen, folks, and it was a physical flood, but it was not water, and it was an event that covered virtually the entire world. We can find evidence of this flood across Europe, across the Americas, even here in Australia. And evidence of this flood appears as buildings that have a sub-level, a level below ground, and also as many of the buildings that look like they were carved into rock faces, look like they were carved into cliffs. There's a very real possibility that they weren't carved into the cliffs, but simply the cliffs flowed over them, or perhaps the cliffs even became molten around them. But however it happened and however it manifested, suffice to say there is a good deal of evidence to indicate that the mud flood is a very, very genuine event, and it's very likely that it occurred in the mid to late 1840s. And there's a lot of people who've been putting a lot of research into this, and a lot of information is being uncovered about what has truly happened in the past. And our history appears to be very, very different to what the mainstream has taught us, to what we've learned in academic institutions, what we learned in schools. In fact, none of what we are taught in schools of what our history is backed up by physical evidence. All the physical evidence says something quite different. And there may be some people that would debate that. They'd say, well, no, we've got a lot of physical evidence to support the official timeline, but really, when you look at the physical evidence, you can construct any story you want to make it sort of fit with the evidence, but you have to leave a great deal of it out, which is why there's so many great mysteries and anomalous objects and all the names they think up for all the things they can't explain. You know, and ultimately, folks, if there's one artifact that is out of place, then the official version is wrong. And there are literally hundreds of artifacts that are out of place, if the official version is to be believed at all. And again, these are all sort of listed as anomalous objects and great mysteries, and all shrouded in secrecy and presented as something that we just don't know how they did it. But really, if you can face the very real possibility that they don't fit because the timeline and the history that we're given is completely wrong, then you begin to see a little bit of the bigger picture. And it is wrong, folks. Our history is wrong. I have no qualms in saying that. It's completely wrong. Most of it has been completely fabricated, and I would suggest that it's been done absolutely deliberately for a very specific reason. The question is, how did they do it? How did they erase history so effectively? And what really happened? Well, what evidence suggests really happened is, as I said, this mud flood. There was a flood that's gone across the entire world, and the mud flood, because it is mud, it's not water, it appears to have come from the land itself. The question is, how did that occur? Was it a natural occurrence, or was it simply done by somebody or something? And the other question is, of course, why can no one remember this? How has it been so effectively expunged from human memory and expunged from our history? Well, as I've said before, how long would it take to change history and hide history? And effectively it would take 3 generations, but you could actually do it in 1 if you were to remove the older people, well, most of the older people anyway, a high percentage of the population, just wipe them out and simply replace them with children. The children wouldn't know what history was, especially if they were children that have just been put in place after some sort of a cataclysm like a mud flood. And these children would believe any history that they were taught. I mean, they wouldn't even have an interest in history to begin with. You'd put them in place, set them to work, and they'd be too caught up in the rigours of everyday survival to ever even question where they come from or what they're doing there. I mean, for a child, it'd just be the way things are. They would gradually grow up over generations, and you would just teach these new generations this new history. And when you look at the stories of old, the stories of the chimney sweeps and how so many children were working back in the old days, and we just thought it was terrible that there was child labour and that's the way they did it, but why was there so many children working? Why weren't the adults there to do the jobs that the children were doing? There's been a lot of photos that have been surfacing lately, a lot of old pictures, and you can go and find them yourself. If you look at any historical photos from around circa 1850, look at St. Petersburg, look at some of the major cities in the United States, major cities in England, major cities right across Europe around circa 1850, and you'll find very, very few people in the photographs. You see these big cities, but there's just no people around. Why is that? And another thing you can find, something that I found on a channel the other day, which is another channel that I've just found, which I really do recommend people go and look at. It's a channel called Conspiracies Are Us, and it's a very small channel. It's only got about 2,700 subscribers or something, and I cannot imagine why, because he's doing some very, very good dot connecting, and he does deserve more views. But what I saw on this channel was a video that he'd done. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put a link below in the description. And it's about 21 minutes long, but it was a video discussing foundlings and orphan trains in the late 1800s. And a foundling is a child which is abandoned and is found and cared for by someone else, or perhaps taken on to an orphanage or even an asylum, because there were many places that were set up and they were called asylums, and these were simply for people to care for children and for unmarried mothers to go and have their babies as well. And any woman who had a child out of wedlock circa 1850 was required by law to hand their baby over to a foundling home. And this is what was happening in so-called orphan trains. And they just used to be shipped out there, and all the kids would get off the train and people would get up there and pick the children that they wanted, and then the train would be reloaded and they'd move on to the next town and they'd pick the children that they wanted. All the children were picked to use for labour. And this was happening all around the world, and there were major enterprises in place set up to manage these children, to care for these children, to ship them all around the place. There's reports of certain cities in Italy, for example, that had up to 1,200 foundling homes in the cities just to accept the influx of foundlings that were coming into the areas. And the question is, where were all these children coming from? And again, there's every indication that all of these children were put to work. I mean, that's what is there in the documentation. All of these kids that were shipped everywhere all around the world were all put to work. So again, the question is, where were the adults? Why weren't the adults doing the work? And why exactly would so much labour be needed? You know, in a normal society, in a normal world, if things have gone along the timeline that we're told, and there's just families going out and colonising new areas, you know, the settlers going out building their log cabins and having children, why would you need this huge influx of child labour to be sent so many places around the world? But I think it's extremely interesting, the volume of children that were being shipped around the world and the evidence that exists all around the world to indicate that there was a civilization prior to this one not too long ago, and this current civilization simply moved in and took over the real estate. And as I've said before, folks, really when you look at our cities, there's no way these cities were built by us. Some of the architecture is just too old. Some of the architecture is just too complicated by our standards. How do we ever do any of this stuff? I mean, we certainly can't do it today. And some of the architecture here in Australia, it's not possible for the settlers to have built this. They simply wouldn't have had the machinery to be able to quarry the stones to build these huge government buildings, which are very old buildings. We've got buildings here that have been here since the late 1700s, and yet this country is supposed to have been colonised in 1770. And yet by 1778 we've got cities, by the early 1800s we've got huge cities, and it's just not possible for these cities to have been built in that time. And evidence would suggest that they weren't built in that time. They were already here. We just simply cleaned them up and moved in and took over the real estate. And of course, when you consider that, then you've got to ask the question, well, what happened to all the people that were in the cities before we came and did the cleanup? You know, what happened to everything, folks? What happened to all the technology? You know, some of the technology that exists in these old buildings, and a lot of them, as I've said before, some of the buildings like churches and some of these very, very complex structures you see around the place, they don't really look like buildings. They look like they're machines. They look like they're energy gathering machines. And I think all buildings were designed to actually gather energy. I think free energy was a reality. I think free energy was part of everyday life, and I think that a lot of these structures were designed with that in mind. And they were designed to harvest energy from the surrounding field. I know it sounds a little outrageous, but there's every indication this is what was going on. Have you looked at some of the old fireplaces in some of the very old buildings? They don't seem very conducive to burning actual fires in there. Some of them are extremely shallow and don't appear to have chimneys attached to them, and there's no grating, no sort of place to actually build the fire. Very strange looking fireplaces. They seem to be connected to a metal type of device, some sort of a metal railing that runs around them, and there's always these two items, like two urns or two little spires that sit at the front of the fireplace, and there's always a metal plate at the back. And perhaps these two metal objects at the front combined in perhaps some sort of positive negative energy field and projected some sort of a beam onto the metal plate at the back, or some sort of energy onto the plate, and the plate itself was what heated up and heated the room. And a lot of these old fireplaces, they've got these setups, folks, and they really don't look very conducive to burning wood. And again, you look at the copper tops of a lot of these buildings and these devices that are all constructed on top of them, you've really got to wonder why they're there. Are they just there for decoration, or is there a higher function to some of these things? There's a building in Florida called the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which has got a very interesting device on top of it. And it looks like it's just some decorative thing, but when you look at the building, this device, it's very unusually shaped and it's made of metal. And it's quite an intricate little device as well, and it's not exactly in a position where people are going to be viewing it. So what's it doing there? And why go to all the trouble to make something so incredibly decorative and to put it up in the center of the roof? And this is quite a big hotel. This is a 540 room hotel. What's it doing with this metal device on the roof? And if it's just there for decorative purposes, why do they make it out of metal? You know, it's very obviously different to the rest of the building. The question is, what's it doing there? Is it just a decoration, or is it actually performing some sort of function? And I would very much suggest that it is performing some sort of function, and that free energy was a reality back in the middle of the last century and is very much still a reality today. It's just that the technology is being hidden from us. And really looking at all this, folks, looking at these foundlings and this whole information about the mud flood that's come out, all the information that's been surfacing lately, it really causes me to question everything. Question everything that I thought I knew about history. And I've spent a lot of time in my life looking into history. It's always been a fascination for me because of all these artifacts lying all over the world, all this weird stuff lying everywhere. You kind of find out about it when you're young and you want to know where it all comes from and what really happened. You know, but all you've got to go on, I mean, all I had to go on for many years was books from academia, books from libraries. I mean, you could go to places and see things, but then you try to research them. All you've really got to go on is local legends and what the books tell you. But there's so much more information surfacing now, and the whole idea of these foundlings, these massive amounts of children being shipped all around the world and being used to run cleanup operations after the mud flood. You've really got to question this, folks. You've really got to look at what happened and where our civilizations came from. And like I said, it causes me to question everything. All of the wars, all of the formation of society as we know it that we've been given anyway. The Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II, all of these things, I question all of them now. I don't think any of them have been fought under the pretexts that we've been told. I think all of them are actually all related and are all part of the destruction of this ancient culture, this ancient civilization. And I think it's still ongoing. I think that the war in Syria, the destruction of Aleppo, the war in Yemen, this is all about destroying the infrastructure, destroying the buildings, destroying every trace of the past, any trace of anything that would suggest the existence of Tartaria, of Atlantis, of this lost culture, this lost civilization. It helps me understand the feeling I had when I was a child, why I was so appalled and so disoriented by the fact that people had to pay to be alive and we had to buy land. Why I felt quite literally that some terrible mistake had been made and I'd been born into the wrong reality. It makes me question where my mother really came from. My mother and her 4 sisters, 5 daughters that were just suddenly in Tasmania, living out on this property. How did they get there? Were they really born there? My mother remembers her mother was very young and died very early, and she had quite a strict father who married another young woman. But I really begin to question all of it. I really begin to question what my roots are, what my family ties are, what my family tree really is. Because really when you begin to look at the bigger picture of all this, folks, you begin to see that the war for Tartaria was the major battle of this earth.
global civilization that spanned multiple continents around the world. And in this video, I'm going to show you key evidence ranging from South America, the Mid-East, Southeast Asia, and when you connect it all, it far exceeds the realm of just a coincidence. Now real quick, let me get the big question out of the way that most people have when they hear this information for the first time, which is, okay, if we were so advanced, what happened to us? Or where's the evidence like metal buildings? Just when you consider how they were able to cut and carve these massive stones and place them, and yet they share similarities across multiple continents around the world, you have to start asking questions. They even have similarities between the depiction of the third eye, as well as animals. It's located at the center of foreheads. And like I said, when you consider the similarities between architecture and stone structures and buildings across multiple continents, when you look at these similarities, you have to ask yourself, were they built by the same people? Now, the true history of ancient human civilization is far older and was once far more advanced than we were ever taught in school. Not only were we alive at the time of the cataclysm, but that we somehow had the intellectual knowledge and capabilities to build a massive network of more than 200 underground cities that are completely unexplainable by scientists, archaeologists, and historians, some of which are hundreds of feet underground, more than 11 levels deep, have advanced air ventilation systems, and architecture that have completely dumbfounded modern engineering.
City underground anyway?
Basically, back in the day, that street level that we walk around right now wasn't the ordinary street level. It used to be about 16 foot underground. Well, it was street level back then, and over time the city has been built on top of each other, so there's so much hidden history, shops, air raid shelters, just all kinds of stuff, even a market, a hidden secret market underground.
Alright, just go. Shit. Someone else go. Go, go, go. Come on, y'all.
This is amazing. The medical post. Yes. Jeez. I don't expect to find any items here, but it's just, still, I mean, the fact is we are underground right now. Wow. The lavatory arch. Arch number 7. I'm just by myself right now. I'm just roaming hardcore. YOLO. See, I think the city blocks off entrances. So I don't know how far we can actually go in these tunnels, but there's so many different entryways down here that leads into the other ones. Maybe the bathrooms? It says ladies, I'm not really too sure. The gentleman. My god. This is totally an adventure. Yo! What the heck? Just so many bathrooms. Again, anything that looks like an entryway or an arch that's blocked off by bricks. Arches 1 and 3 is down there. Aw, man, blocked off. Well, we gotta do it. Pretty deep. Woo! That scared me. The hell? This looks like a huge bunker. Yo. It's all concrete. I'm not sure if I should be doing this by myself. Ooh. I hear everyone above me. They're just walking the streets. It's freaky. Yo, screw this, I'm gonna get lost. Cause look it, now it looks like a maze. Now it's another door that looks like the door I was just in. Whoa. Dude, no way, this is way too confusing. I have to be really smart about this. Piling in progress. When does this end? Everything's really looking the same. Starting to get like a little panicky. I should probably get out of here. At least to find my friends to make sure I don't get lost by myself. Because there's no service down here. I just seen a rat go by. I went down there and I found this. I don't remember if I seen this or not. But I remember seeing this, and I filmed it. So I gotta go back out this way. Whew. Okay. I will not get lost, but what's through here? It's so quiet. You can see my breath in here. Okay, yeah, this is definitely the way I came. Yo, I was by myself. What?
This is still hidden in the grave.
Wait, that's a human bone?
Yeah, and then a woman's hairbrush and a marble.
Another bone.
All the bones there.
Another.
Quite a few bones. Yeah. And these have got nothing left on them. Like, these have been down here at least 100 years, I reckon. Like, it's just disintegrated.
Another one. We're just finding them all. They're just all inside the dirt. You wanna go next?
We must have been down there for a good 2 hours because it was light out and now it's dark.
Mostly from the 1850s. Now these are all really old, and some of the earliest photographs we have of any of these major cities. Right now we're in Helsinki, Finland. And what's remarkable about most of these photographs is the lack of people in these major cities. Now Now the cities are fully built out. It seems they couldn't pack any more homes and buildings, and yet they are void. They are pretty much completely void of people and activities. Many of the ports that we see are empty. There's no boats on them. There's no carriages. So this is really mysterious. Here we have some people. We see dogs and some horses in the background. But still, when you look at the scale of the city... Now here's a picture from the early 1900s. Now here we do see a crowd of people. Now this looks, rather normal. What is unusual about this is the wear on the wall. This is apparently a brand new city, a new capital city, and yet the wear on the wall, what happened to that wall? This, either it's built on top of something older, or some kind of cataclysm that really weathered that wall and seemed to preserve anything that was any higher than it. So really fascinating. We find this all over the world. The next photo here that we're going to see is in Finland. We see a very similar situation. Completely void of people, and it's just an absolute mystery. Beautiful buildings, beautiful architecture. Clearly seems, I wouldn't say old, but aged. These cities don't look completely brand new, and yet it's as if they are brand new when we don't see any people. I mean, can you imagine, what it would take to clear out all the people? Possible, you get some people that would disobey, and I don't know, maybe that's what we're seeing here. We do occasionally see somebody. Really interesting, because a lot of these cities were, just getting into their prime around this time period, and yet we don't see anybody. Now this is a photo. If you were to leave your shutter open, this is what you would expect. You see the people, you see shuffling, even though they are really not that many in that picture, but still, that gives you an idea of what an open shutter photo would look like. You would still see blurry images, similar as if you were taking headlights at night on those streets. So here again in Finland, we see a completely empty port, and even the windmills aren't spinning. I mean, it's this complete frozen scenario. And it's a real mystery. Again, look at the empty ports here. And later on in the video, I'll show you some pictures in the Americas, in North America. And I'd noticed similar things in the building. Washington, D.C. It doesn't seem like there's any people around it. It's very, very strange. Now here's Venice, Italy. And again, where is everyone? Just a couple boats? These areas should be bustling with people. Here's the Czech Republic, Prague. And it's as if these are model cities. Now later on in the video, what I will show is a similar scenario in China, where they actually have built entire cities, and there's nobody living there. They have freeways, 6 lanes on each side, not a single car on them. And it brings a lot of speculation. Spain. Empty roads, clean and smooth. years of building in these towns. I mean, this isn't your modern neighborhood building, your cookie cutter. I mean, this is grand architecture, absolutely grand. And yet to be devoid of people, and not just in one country, but worldwide. And these pictures are nothing. I mean, this is just a little scratch, tiny little scratch on the surface. Paris, France, I mean, in this time period in the 1850s, still an absolutely bustling city, and yet not a boat, not a person, just a complete ghost town, as if a bomb went off. Really, really interesting. Now here is St. Petersburg in Russia. And St. Petersburg, I think, again, if we were to look at history, I mean, this was poor, poor people in this time period. I mean, barely able to eat. And when we see the city in the 1850s, again, devoid of people, as if this city has been abandoned. I mean, in this time period, to be so poor and have this kind of architecture and in a grand scale. And what we notice with a lot of these pictures is, you know, mud on the sides of the building, as we can see on the bottom left corner here. So, what can we conclude? Were we the inheritors of a prior civilization? It sure seems like the architecture all around the world is very similar in this Greek Romanesque style, and yet it's found from corner to corner, as if these were a similar people, a worldwide people, and somehow there was a wiping out. We see the mud floods, damage from heavy water, and the pictures we do see with people, it's as if they've just been introduced. Nobody's in any hurry to go anywhere. They're just standing around in awe, as if these people have been introduced into this area, as if they've just inherited these great cities. And by the 1900s, things are pretty well populated. Here in the 1850s in Mexico City, same scenario. Just a mess. A mess and no people. Streets are filled with dirt, overgrown. And again, even in Mexico, this architecture, this highly advanced architecture here in this picture, water aqueduct. And here in Washington, D.C., same scenario. As if we just walked into this, we inherited something. And really, there's very little proof before the camera and the picture. And our pictures begin around this time. This appears to be the beginning of our time, as far as anyone can prove. This seems like the beginning of our history. Anything else is just a story. But even this, 150 years ago, we really don't know. Even with the proof of the photograph, There is no proof. There's more mystery. Here we can see the port of Montreal, bleak, void, and yet the grand architecture, once again. Who built all this? Now we have stories, of course. Supposedly all this is known. But yet something doesn't seem to fit the narrative. Now there were great plagues, and great plagues wiped out half of Europe, and there were great fires, and much destruction in this time period. But what if it was all the same thing? What if it all happened at once? Wiping out. And of course, this is only theorizing. I have no idea. Another alternative is that they were built. They were built before any people ever came. And then they were populated. Now this idea would seem ridiculous. It would absolutely seem ridiculous if it weren't already being done today. Today China is building dozens of cities that can house millions of people. And yet, nobody lives in these cities. The amount of money and resources that it would take. And yet, somebody in their leadership seems perfectly justified in building cities long before anybody will occupy them. And maybe this is what we're seeing here. Maybe somebody knows, and they're awaiting the right time. Maybe the lucky ones. Maybe it won't even be called China then, and a whole new history will be written. Maybe. We really don't know. Well, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Have a blessed day.
The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. And this week's opening quote comes from Elie Wiesel.
What is the occult, forbidden history of humanity, the reset of humanity, Tartaria, mud flood, and what happened only 2-3 centuries ago? Starting with this picture from 1973 in Paris, you can obviously see that something was built before our humanity. These constructions, these buildings, which that's why they call them mud flood, because there's mud, there's earth covering them. So obviously this comes from a different period, which is before our time. Not so much ago, not so long ago, but something like 2 or 3 centuries. This has to do with what happened in 1812 regarding the great mystery surrounding the Napoleonic war, or the war with Napoleon. Also, there's evidence that before the war with Napoleon, there was an advanced technology race, or an advanced humanity with advanced technology in that age preceding it. So 17th, 16th, 15th centuries. Pictures around the world, not just in Russia, but everywhere, they show you that mud flood is real. The evidence that Tartaria and mud flood existed. Old buildings show signs of being mud flooded. Something happens, someone or something reset humanity, and these buildings that you see right now are just the construction that they were built over on top of what we had before, and the humanity that lived before our time. The thing is, what nobody understands, nobody speaks about, is this period of 3 years during the war. There was a period of 3 years during the war, which is described as the years of 1800 and frozen to death. 3 years in which humanity did not have summer. Human beings were freezing because of the cold, and obviously this allows us to think something like an artificial cataclysm made with artificial weather control technology, which means that the whole history of human race changes. Millions of people perished during these 3 years of obviously of war. And you can see the War of 1812 was a global war that became virtually a Game of Thrones kind of thing. It was not just with Europe, because it was to do with the whole world, especially Russia. Now history has been either hidden or altered concerning all the events of 1812. The ruling elite who belonged to the secret societies have embarked us into a new age, which some people call the age of the Great Deception. So you had Tartaria before. Tartaria was what we know today as Russia, and Tartaria had their own flag, which you can see if you investigate the flags of those days before the 19th century. And Tartaria was a major world power that was multicultural. It had its own government. Since the 19th century, though, it has been quietly put away and incorporated into Russia and other countries, and we don't really know what happened. The color-coded map you see on the screen, which dates back to 1652, it's based on the Gregorian calendar, and Tartaria was Asia, including also India and China, and also shows Tartaria controlling all of North America, even Central America. There's a growing consensus that the Great Wall of China was not built by the Chinese, but built by Tartaria, and is much newer in construction, based on the maps predating the 1600s. The Great Wall of China has fortifications and gates facing north towards Tartaria and not south towards China, which means that the Tartarians built this wall to protect themselves against certain invasions from the south. Marco Polo, the famous explorer, never once mentioned the wall during his trips, and he's likely that this wall was built when Tartaria was in decline to help keep the people out who were invading at some point from the south. Now there's also a consensus that many of the Indian nations, the Indian tribes of America, are descendants of those of Tartaria and Scythia. There's also a common theme with the age that preceded the War of 1812, and some refer to it as the Old World Order, or the Golden Age of Christianity. Also, you have these fortress star-looking buildings and castles and cities even that have the same technology being used to make the stars, the same engineering. It's absolutely impressive. The maps are in 3D, and notice the plans and maps for star fortifications have amazing high details as well, and this was done by intelligent people who had technology to build these things in a time where people were supposed to be primitive. The Statue of Liberty in the US also has inspirations in this star fortress type of technology, and also regions in Russia are still showing the remnants of what was in recent history the Vatican City, Parco Adriano, in terms of the fortress. And if you summarize all the stars you see, then they would require millions of man hours to work to create them. and also during a time of extraordinary peace, because if there was wars in the world, that you would not be able to construct these constructions. But because you can construct this, it means that the world was at peace, the golden age of humanity. As you can see the maps, Europe and Asia are full of these things, but also Africa and Americas, of course, they have these as well. And in order to build such fortresses, not only hundreds of thousands of skilled workers were needed, but also brilliant engineers, designers, surveyors, and entire institutions, like what we call companies, had to exist to put this into place. Now, another common theme that preceded the War of 1812 is the neoclassical architecture that's also over the world. Neoclassical architecture can be identified by the long columns and perfect arch forms that you can see in these pictures that are showing on the screen right now. Several parts of the world, including Iran, Vietnam, Indonesia, Shanghai in China, also Japan, even Calcutta in India, and even Argentina across the ocean, they all show you these different things, different buildings, but with the same neoclassical architecture in different parts of the world. Another common theme that also appears in the architecture are the large domes with mercury antennas at the top, which you can see now. Those antennas were not put there just for decoration purposes. Beautiful as they are, they serve a purpose, which is atmospheric energy. Free energy has been harnessed for centuries out of the air, which is what Nikola Tesla was telling us. Nikola Tesla was not the inventor of this energy, he just knew the truth about the true history of humanity, and he wanted to re-implement this energy, which you can see in Astrakhan, for example. Russia is a very awesome place in terms of, too bad that the Russian language is difficult for English-speaking people, but Astrakhan, if you translate it, and this is in Russia, the translation from Russian means modern electric theater. How the heck did they have modern electric theaters?
If you have time, I found an article from the 1800s describing America being very old. It appears it's from the Franklin Repository, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, July 7th, 1858, titled The Antiquities of America. Throughout the center, length and breadth of the country, washed as it is by the waters of two mighty oceans and abounding in natural resources, enormous beyond what is possible to conceive, we find much to admire in their aspect of beauty, of nature. And whether we travel from the distant shores of Maine to New Brunswick to the golden lands of California and the shores of the great Pacific, or from the bright crystal lakes of Minnesota to the orange groves of Florida, we behold throughout the immense extent the feature of nature, grand and beautiful in every aspect. The mineralogist, the geologist, the naturalist, and even the botanist all have a rich field here. Strange as it may appear, America abounds in antiquities so extensive, so beautiful and majestic, as to rival those of Thebes, of Nineveh. Ruins of ancient cities of immense extent, fortifications, mounds and pyramids, temples with walls built of hewn stone, showing a refined taste in architecture and adorned with human figures beautifully executed, large altars ornamented with hieroglyphs probably giving a record of those who reared them, but which no man has been able to decipher. Remains of ancient palaces with beautiful specimens of sculpture and painting, with many other marks of greatness, prove to us that this is not a new world, but that a powerful empire existed at a very remote period of time, teeming with a population highly skilled in arts and in a state of civilization far beyond anything we have been led to conceive of the Aborigines, previous to the discovery of the continent by Europeans. The antiquities of America extend from the eastern shores of Maine and Massachusetts to the Pacific, and from the Great Lakes and British dominions of Perth and La Plata in South America, and in fact throughout the extent of the continents. Immense forests grow over the ruins of large cities, and the gigantic size of trees, indications that other generations of trees sprung up and grew before them, proves the ruins were in existence before the Christian era. In every portion of the United States, interesting ruins have been found. Sculptured figures of 100 animals of different species, executed in a style far surpassing the Indians. The state of Ohio abounds in ruins at towns and fortifications, with extensive towers and pyramids. At Marietta and in Missouri, beautiful pottery, silver and copper ornaments, and pearls of great beauty and luster have been dug from the earth. In the caves of Tennessee and Kentucky, mummies have been found in a high state of preservation, clothed with cloth and skins of various texture, inlaid with features. Like discoveries have been made at Carrollton near Milwaukee in the state of Wisconsin. Ruins of huge fortifications appear. Similar ruins in the state of Missouri. On the south side of the Missouri River in the western portion of the state is an enclosure of some 500 acres, which includes the ruins of a building, no doubt an ancient tower, with walls 100 feet high and 80 at the base, attached to which a redoubt and citadel, much resembling the structure of a European tower. But it is in south of Mexico that magnificent and beautiful ruins present themselves in abundance. Ruins of majestic cities and magnificent temples and altars with beautiful works of sculpture tastefully wrought. Palaces adorned with paintings, colors chiefly sky blue and light green, which show by their richness and elegance to be the work of a highly cultured people. Those ruins, majestic and beautiful in appearance, but overgrown with thick forests of mahogany and cedar of immense dimensions and great age, prove to the world that the great empire teemed with an immense population, a people skilled in mechanical arts, and in an advanced state of cultivation. The most extensive ruins are to be found in Uxmal and Palenque in the southeast of Mexico. Pyramids coated with stone and quadrangular stone, edifices and terraces. The height of one of these pyramids is 130 feet, and on the summit is supported a temple. One of these facades of the temple are 4 human figures cut into stone with great exactness and elegance. The hands are crossed upon the breast, the head is covered with something like a helmet. About the neck is a garment of the skin of an alligator, and over each body is a figure of Death's head and bones. At Palenque are immense ruins, with the remains of a royal palace. One temple, that of Copan, is 200 feet by 650 and supposed to have been as large as St. Paul's at Rome. Another temple of great dimension is here, having the entrance 100 feet long and 10 feet broad. It stands on an elevation of 60 feet. The pillars of the portico are adorned with hieroglyphs and other devices. Different objects of worship have been found, representations of the gods who are worshipped in this country. These temples, with 14 large buildings and many other objects of curiosity, stand here as monuments of ancient greatness, to remind us of the remote origin of a mighty empire. The city has been called the Thebes of America, and travelers have supposed that it must have been 60 miles in circumference and contained a population of 3 million souls. Centuries must have elapsed and dynasties succeeded each other before such orders of architecture were introduced, and a great length of time must have passed before an empire would become sufficiently powerful to erect such temples and possess a city of such vast extent. In looking back to the past, we feel interested in the imagination that this people, in the noonday of glory, enjoyed all the fruits and luxuries of an advanced civilization. But when we hold these ruins, a melancholy must at once seize our minds. On the ground where once nations met in their strength and power, wild beasts now roam, and venomous serpents wend their way. And over these vast cities, where once the busy hum of industry and the voice of merriment resounded, grows the vast cedar, on which branches the owls chatter. In this country, is exhibited the largest pyramid in the world, that of Cholula, near Puebla. It covers 114 acres and is 200 feet high. On its summit was a temple, and in the interior has been discovered a vault, roofed with beams of wood containing skeletons and idols. Several smaller pyramids surrounded this large one. It appears to have been formed by cutting a hill into an artificial shape. Its dimensions are immense, being nearly 2 miles in circumference and about 400 feet high. It's divided into terraces and slopes covered with platforms, stages, and bastions, elevated one above the other, and are formed with large stones skillfully cut and joined without cement. In some respects, the style of architecture resembles the Gothic, being massive and durable, while in other respects it resembles the Egyptian. Yet the general construction matter and style of architecture is different from anything described in the world. In Egypt, hieroglyphs on stone denote remarkable events which no one has been able to decipher. A dark shade rests on the antiquities of America, and few rays of light enliven the gloom. We have ancient history to inform us of the events in Egypt, how that empire was founded, and how it prospered and fell. We have the same record at Babylon, Nineveh, Greece, Rome, Carthage, but not in the least information we have in relation to those who erected these cities. What people, whence they came, not a ray of light to dispel the gloom which seems to rest on the earliest history of America. Architecture, sculpture, painting, and all the arts that adorn civilized life have flourished in this country at a period far from remote. This is evidence sufficient to prove that these cities were in ruins at least 16 or 1800 years ago. In Palenque are the remains of an altar over which grows the immense cedar, whose powerful roots enshrine it. The whole city is overgrown with mahogany and cedar trees of enormous size. The concentric circles of these trees, the well-known cycles for a year, have been counted, which shows they were more than 800 years old, and there were indications of another generation of trees having sprung up before them. How few reflect on the fact that America is an old dominion, the seat of an ancient and mighty empire. These facts are opening themselves every day to the eyes of the astonished world. It is to be hoped that the spirit of inquiry, which seems at present to animate all classes of learned men, may throw light on the early history of this remarkable reign. Absolutely fascinating article from 1858.
Lost City found beneath Cuban waters. This exciting news came from a team of explorers headed by Pauline Zalitsky, a marine engineer, and her husband, Paul Weinsweg. Their company worked side by side with the Cuban government to try to uncover hundreds of treasure-laden ships from the Spanish colonial era. But what they uncovered using their advanced sonar equipment was far more mysterious.
Paulina Zalitsky was leaking information about what those discoveries were revealing. According to Zalitsky's reports, she was using a submersible and saw that there were sphinxes down there, that there were bizarre inscriptions on the stones. And remember, we're dealing with something that could not possibly have been above sea level for at least 11,000 years. That could not possibly have been above sea level for at least 11,000 years. She had submersible footage of a pyramid down there that has kind of a change in its slope angle as it goes halfway up, similar to the bent pyramid of Dashur in Egypt. So we're seeing a direct relationship between these monuments and what we see in Egypt. That to me is astonishing because it suggests that the Egyptian pyramids as well may have been built at the same time and are therefore far older than the assumptions of conventional archaeology. There it is right down there. It's very obviously artificial, and then the whole story somehow got suppressed.
Zalitsky estimated that it would have taken over 11,000 years for such a structure to have sunken to the depth at which these structures were said to be found. Strangely, after they released their findings, the news outlets and networks went dark. What might they have stumbled upon? If this structure underneath the ocean floor sank possibly 11,000 years or more ago, could this be a link to the infamous Atlantis?
Atlantis is almost a catch-all term for trying to find the origins of civilization itself. This probably goes back to the 19th century when the US congressman by the name of Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book that was to become the seminal work on Atlantis. It was entitled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And in here, what he proposed was that all of the civilizations of the ancient world and the New World, the Americas, had a mother civilization as its source. All of the information that's been left to us on Atlantis by Plato, the Greek philosopher who wrote around 350 BC, suggests that we should be looking for Atlantis somewhere in the area of the Bahamas and the Caribbean. But because of Ignatius Donnelly's ideas to do with a mother civilization, Atlantis therefore becomes this concept more than an actual drowned city. I believe that Atlantis existed. I believe that a high culture probably peopled those massive islands of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and they may well have been drowned and destroyed in the Great Cataclysm, the so-called Younger Dryas event.
Some experts, like Jack Carey, have done some alternative research that might coincide with the science behind the Younger Dryas.
As far as the sunken pyramids go in the oceans of the world, a lot of that can be tied to research being done by Dr. Courtney Brown and his group of very skilled remote viewers. And they're beginning to not only target what they described as being Atlantis, but through their remote viewings, they're beginning to ascertain that it was this very science that caused the downfall of the society, that they used it in such a way that it literally caused a destruction of the landmass, and that may have actually been part of some sort of conflict or war that was going on. The fact that there's just so many of them all around the world is what's fascinating. Humanity has not come together in any way, shape, or form the way we would want or hope or expect or love for it to do ever since the Tower of Babel, ever since we were spread all over the earth.
A conflict? What kind of conflict could Dr. Courtney Brown and his researchers be picking up on? Ancient texts from the Greek philosopher Plato explain in great detail the destruction of Atlantis by Zeus as payback for human arrogance. The legend describes the founder of the great city to be half god and half human, and ruled by Poseidon. As punishment for their immoral bankruptcy, Zeus sent a ball of fire to destroy the aquatic cities. The curator of the Joseph Campbell collection draws some parallels from Plato's story and a similar tale between two warring Sumerian gods.
It is very possible that the Greek story, the one we find in Plato about a lost continent, Atlantis, ruled over by Poseidon, the god of the oceans, that this has earlier roots. After all, storytellers in those times borrowed from other stories, and we can follow. It's called syncretic, the way information, images, and narratives move from one culture to another, particularly if they're relatively geographically close by, which in this case is true. Sure, Enki, the great god of the Sumerian traditions, could have been the Poseidon figure, and the destroyer god could have come from the Sumerian tradition. This is not only possible, it is likely. Zeus is the name we are familiar with from the Greek tradition that comes and punishes the people of Atlantis who have achieved so much because they started taking it for granted.
What could the people of Atlantis have taken for granted? How could they have become immorally bankrupt? Could this be another interpretation of a god figure striking down upon humans for knowing too much?
I think it is interesting because we thought for a long time that Plato had been taught by Egyptian priests. But thanks to the Edfu text, we wonder if he actually had the copies in hand. We will never know. But there are very similar elements between the Plato version of the Atlantis and the Egyptian Edfu text of Atlantis I translated. And we can understand, in a few words, that Osiris, who is considered to be the Sumerian god Enki, fled Mesopotamia to help start a new civilization. According to the doctrine of Enlil, and he flees to Atlantis and settles down on some islands in the Atlantic Ocean. This ancient territory is mentioned in some funerary texts, such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They call it La Mata, which could be roughly translated by the water crown of Ta. Ta is one of Osiris's names. It is the Egyptian name for Enki. Like all the other gods, he had many different names. We understand that Ta settles on some islands, and we can identify similar data to that of Plato's writings. In the Edfu versions of the Atlantis, there are always attacks from the forces of Set. Set is, of course, Enlil. We understand that he went all the way to Egypt, even all the way to Morocco, Azores, and the Canary Islands. Set doesn't stop attacking Osiris's islands. Another interesting element to this story, there is a technology that Egyptian gods used for protection, the Djed pillars. They place them around the city. Apparently, some are even on the water. The texts call them floaters. They can protect the city, and we can understand in parts of the text that thanks to the energy coming from these Djed pillars, Egyptians can control water and create water walls, very thick ones, in order to protect the city. Many mythologies and legends have similarities. We understand that Osiris could actually be Poseidon or Neptune, and Enlil, in some ways, could be Zeus.
What is interesting to note is Poseidon is always pictured with a pitchfork that was later connected with the biblical pitchfork of Satan by the Catholic Church. If Enki is connected to this interpretation, could the destruction of Atlantis be the story of Yahweh's wrath on advanced humanity?
In the Edfu text that I translated, they mention the fall of the Eye of Sound. Let me explain. In my opinion, Venus was located close to Mulgae. It was one of its satellites, and when Mulgae exploded, its satellite, Venus, is ejected into the solar system, and at some point, it comes very close to Earth. Then there's Osiris's death. According to the text, this was the work of Enlil, who prepared his attack, both on Earth and in the sky. He really wanted to make history and impact significantly the gods' history. He was not going to be defeated by earthly technology. Venus was ejected into the solar system, turns inside it for thousands of years, before eventually placing itself where it is today. Enlil must have really wanted to finally put an end to the lengthy war he was waging against Enki Osiris. And he came close with the death of Osiris.
Que lorsqu'Isis décide de faire revenir Osiris dans un nouveau corps qui sera le corps d'Horus, dans la Grande Pyramide.
But then a second event, the story tells us, and luckily for history in general, Osiris comes back as Horus, and the battle can start again. There are many elements that explain these events, and that describe how Horus arrives to destroy the evil of the world in order to avenge his father's death. This explains a similar catastrophic event that happened at the same time, such as the destruction of Atlantis about 10,000 years ago.